Part 2. Marcus spent the next 3 days locked in his office aboard the human embassy station, going through every document related to the trial. The office was small with gray walls and a single window that looked out onto the spinning stars. Claire brought him coffee and meals that he barely touched while his eyes scanned page after page of testimony, evidence logs, and legal briefs. The more he read, the more convinced he became that something was very wrong with how this case had been handled. The body cam footage from the 3 officers should have been the most important evidence in the entire trial. Police regulations required all officers to wear active cameras during their shifts, and the cameras were supposed to upload data continuously to secure servers. But according to the evidence logs, all 3 cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned exactly 4 minutes before the shooting occurred. The technical report claimed it was a software glitch caused by interference from nearby comm towers. Marcus had worked with enough technical experts to know that simultaneous failure of 3 independent systems was nearly impossible without deliberate sabotage. Claire discovered something even more disturbing in the witness statements. The 3 Xanthian civilians who saw the shooting had given detailed accounts to the initial investigators. Their statements were consistent with each other and with the surveillance footage. But when it came time for trial, Judge Holloway had ruled their testimony inadmissible because they hadn't been formally sworn in according to proper coalition protocols. The technicality seemed absurd to Marcus. The Xanthian witnesses had followed every standard procedure, but Holloway found the obscure regulation from 20 years ago that he claimed invalidated their statements. Marcus arranged a meeting with Lieutenant Amy Harper, one of the original investigators on the case. Amy was a Coalition Security Force officer who had been working interspecies crimes for almost a decade. She had a reputation for being thorough and honest, which made her unpopular with officers who preferred to cut corners. When Marcus called her, Amy hesitated for a long moment before agreeing to meet. They chose a small cafe in the lower commercial decks of the station, where surveillance was lighter and conversations could be more private. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and synthetic sweeteners. Marcus found Amy sitting at a corner table nursing a cup of something that steamed in the recycled air. She was in her mid-30s with short blonde hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Marcus sat down across from her and ordered nothing. They looked at each other for a moment before Amy spoke first. "I wondered when someone would start asking questions," she said quietly. Marcus leaned forward, keeping his voice low even though the nearest customers were several tables away. "Tell me what happened with the investigation," he said. Amy wrapped both hands around her cup as if trying to draw warmth from it. "Everything was wrong from the start," she explained. "We got the call about the shooting and responded within 6 minutes. When we arrived, the 3 officers had already secured the scene and filed their initial reports. They claimed Sikh had made aggressive movements, and they fired in self-defense. But the surveillance footage told a different story according to Amy. She had watched it within an hour of the shooting, and it clearly showed Sikh with his hands raised when the officers opened fire. There was no aggressive movement, no reaching for anything, no justification for lethal force. Amy had immediately flagged the case for a full criminal investigation. That was when the problems began. Every request Amy made for additional resources was denied. When she tried to interview the Xanthian witnesses, she was told they had already returned to their homeworld and couldn't be compelled to testify. When she attempted to recover the body cam footage, she discovered it was already listed as corrupted in the evidence database. When she asked for forensic analysis of the bullet trajectories, her request sat in a pending queue for 3 months until it was too late to matter for trial. Someone with serious authority was blocking the investigation at every turn. Amy tried to escalate her concerns to her commanding officer, but was told to follow proper channels and stop making waves. She filed 7 different complaints through official channels, and every single one disappeared into the bureaucracy without response. It was like pushing against a wall that kept growing higher no matter how hard she tried. Marcus asked who could have that kind of power to obstruct a coalition investigation. Amy shook her head slowly. It would have to be someone high up in the justice system, or someone with connections to people that high. Judges have a lot of influence over how evidence is processed and what gets priority in the investigation pipeline. If a judge wanted a case to go a certain way, they could make it very difficult for investigators to do their jobs properly. The implications were clear to Marcus. Judge Holloway hadn't just delivered a corrupt verdict, He had been involved in corrupting the investigation from the very beginning. But why would a respected coalition judge risk everything to protect 3 police officers who murdered an unarmed diplomat? What could possibly be worth that risk? Amy had been thinking about the same questions for months. She pulled out her personal tablet and showed Marcus something she had been tracking on her own time. It was a list of cases that Judge Holloway had presided over during the past 3 years. Amy had been keeping records because her instincts told her the Sikh case wasn't an isolated incident. She was right. The list contained 8 other trials involving human defendants accused of crimes against alien victims. In every single case, the humans had been found not guilty or received minimal sentences that seemed completely disconnected from the severity of their crimes. Marcus studied the list carefully. There was the case of 2 human miners who killed a Krillian worker in a dispute over claim rights. There was a human corporate executive accused of poisoning water supplies on a Telvian colony world. There was a human ship captain who had been caught smuggling weapons to rebels fighting against the coalition. All different crimes, all different circumstances, but all with the same result. Judge Holloway found reasons to dismiss evidence, disqualify witnesses, or interpret laws in ways that benefited the human defendants. Claire had been right to be suspicious, and Amy had been right to keep tracking these cases. This wasn't about one corrupt verdict. It was about a pattern of corruption designed to protect humans from accountability for crimes against aliens. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm and think clearly. Anger wouldn't help, evidence would. He asked Amy if she would be willing to help him investigate further. Amy looked frightened, but she nodded. "I became a cop to protect people and uphold justice," she said. "If I stay silent now, then what was the point of any of it? But we have to be careful. Whoever is behind this has already shown they can manipulate the justice system. If they find out we're digging into this, we could end up dead or disappeared." Marcus understood the risks, but he also understood that sometimes you had to stand up even when it was dangerous. He thanked Amy for her courage, and they agreed to stay in contact through encrypted channels. As he left the cafe, Marcus's mind was already working on the next steps. He needed more information, and he needed allies who couldn't be easily intimidated or bought off. Back in his office, Marcus told Claire everything Amy had shared. Claire's face went pale as she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. "This is bigger than we thought," she said. "If there are 8 other cases, there might be more we haven't found yet. How many people have to be involved to make something like this work?" Marcus didn't have an answer, but he knew they needed help from outside the human legal establishment. They needed perspectives and resources that humans couldn't provide. He thought about the Xanthian delegation and how Ambassador Trell had looked when the verdict was announced. The Xanthians wanted justice for Sikh, and they might be willing to work with Marcus if he approached them carefully. There was also the matter of the other alien species who had been victims in Holloway's cases. If Marcus could connect with them and build a coalition of victims and their families, they might have enough combined influence to demand a real investigation. It was risky because it meant going around the official channels that were clearly compromised. But sometimes the only way to fight corruption was to shine a light on it from outside the system. Marcus made his decision. Tomorrow he would contact Dr. Kira Vex, a Xanthian scientist who had been advocating for justice in Sikh's case. He would also reach out to representatives of the other alien species who had been victimized. It was time to build a team that could stand up to whatever powerful forces were protecting Judge Holloway. Claire agreed to help with the outreach while Amy would continue gathering evidence from inside the security force. As Marcus prepared to leave his office that night, he looked out the window at the stars spinning slowly past. Somewhere out there were hundreds of worlds filled with billions of beings trying to live together in peace. The Galactic Coalition was supposed to prove that different species could coexist under a shared system of justice. If that system was corrupted at its core, then everything humanity had worked for could collapse. Marcus wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. Part 3 Dr. Kira Vex agreed to meet Marcus in her laboratory 3 days after he sent his initial message. The lab was located in the Xanthian quarter of the station, a section where the temperature was kept warmer than humans found comfortable, and the lighting had a slight green tint. Marcus walked through corridors decorated with flowing Xanthian script, and past several Xanthians who gave him cold stares. He couldn't blame them for their hostility after what had happened to Sikh and how the trial had ended. The laboratory door opened automatically. When Marcus approached and he stepped into a space, filled with equipment he didn't recognize. Kira stood at a workstation examining something under a device that projected holographic data into the air. She was tall for a Xanthian, almost 6 feet, with deep green scales that caught the light. Her eyes were large and golden, and they fixed on Marcus with obvious distrust. "You are the human lawyer who wants to investigate the judge," Kira said without any greeting or pleasantries. Marcus nodded and introduced himself properly, explaining his role on the Justice Oversight Committee and his concerns about the verdict. Kira listened without interrupting, and her expression remained unreadable. When Marcus finished, she was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Why should I trust you?" Kira asked. "You are human like the officers who murdered Sikh. You are human like the judge who let them walk free. Why should I believe you want justice instead of just protecting your own species?" The questions were fair, and Marcus had expected them. He told Kira about his background, how he had spent 20 years fighting corruption in Earth's legal system. He explained that he believed in justice regardless of species, and that protecting murderers made humanity weaker, not stronger. Kira studied him carefully with those golden eyes that seemed to look right through him. Finally, she spoke again. "Sikh was my colleague and my friend. We worked together for 8 years, developing healing technologies that would have saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. He came to Earth in good faith, believing that humans wanted to be true partners in the coalition. Instead, he was killed by your police, and your justice system declared his murder acceptable." The pain in her voice was obvious, despite the differences between human and Xanthian emotional expression. Marcus felt the weight of her grief and anger. "I can't change what happened to Sikh," he said quietly, "but I can try to make sure the people responsible are held accountable, and that it doesn't happen again. I need your help to do that. I need access to Xanthian technology and expertise. Most of all, I need someone who won't back down when things get dangerous." Kira turned back to her workstation and touched several controls. A holographic display appeared showing the surveillance footage of Sikh's death. Marcus had seen it before, but watching it again with Sikh's friend standing next to him made it even more painful. The footage showed Sikh raising his hands, clearly trying to comply with the officer's commands. Then the muzzle flashes and Sikh falling to the wet pavement. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. "I have been studying this footage for months," Kira said. "Our technology can analyze details that human systems cannot process. Look here." She manipulated the controls, and the hologram zoomed in on Sikh's hands. "See how his fingers are positioned? That is the Xanthian gesture of peaceful surrender. Any officer who completed basic training in alien customs would know this." The officers were not confused or frightened. They knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus absorbed this information and asked Kira if she would be willing to testify about her analysis. Kira shook her head. "Testimony means nothing if the judge is corrupt. We need to prove that Judge Holloway himself is part of a larger conspiracy. That means finding evidence of who he is working with and why." Marcus agreed and showed Kira the list of cases that Amy had compiled. Kira's eyes widened as she read through the names and details. "This is worse than I thought," Kira said. "These cases span multiple species and different types of crimes. Someone is protecting humans across the board regardless of what they have done. This suggests an organized effort, not just individual corruption." Marcus told her about his suspicion that there was a group working to ensure humans could act with impunity against aliens. Kira nodded slowly. "There have been rumors of such a group among alien communities. We call them the Terra First in our language. It means those who put Earth above all else." The name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. If there really was an organized movement dedicated to human supremacy within the coalition, it would explain everything. It would explain the systematic protection of human criminals, the obstruction of investigations, and Judge Holloway's role in shielding guilty defendants. But proving the existence of such a conspiracy would require more than just pattern recognition. They needed hard evidence. Kira agreed to help Marcus investigate. She had resources and connections in the alien community that Marcus couldn't access on his own. She also had technology that could analyze evidence in ways human systems couldn't match. Together they began planning their next moves. Kira suggested they reach out to other aliens who had been victims in Judge Holloway's cases. If they could build a coalition of victims, they might be able to pool resources and information. Marcus mentioned Commander Thex, a Krillian whose daughter had been killed by human colonists in one of the cases on Amy's list. Kira knew of Commander Thex by reputation. The Krillians were a warrior species known for their 4 eyes and their fierce sense of honor. If Thex agreed to help, he would bring military connections and combat expertise that might prove valuable if the investigation turned violent. They decided to contact Thex together. Kira sent a message through Xanthian diplomatic channels explaining the situation and requesting a meeting. The response came back within hours. Commander Thex would meet them at a neutral location in the station's commercial district the following day. Marcus spent that evening preparing for the meeting while Claire continued digging through legal records looking for more cases that might be connected to Judge Holloway. The next morning, Marcus and Kira met outside a restaurant that served food from dozens of different worlds. Commander Thex was already there waiting for them. He was massive even by Krillian standards, standing almost 7 feet tall with 4 piercing blue eyes and skin that looked like gray stone. He wore a military uniform stripped of rank insignia, and his hands looked like they could crush steel. Commander Thex listened to their explanation of what they had discovered. His 4 eyes focused on Marcus with an intensity that was almost physical. "Your Judge Holloway presided over my daughter's case," Thex said in a voice like grinding rocks. "She was killed by human colonists who wanted land that belonged to Krillian settlers. They burned our settlement and my daughter died in the flames along with 23 others. The colonists claimed it was self-defense, that we attacked them first. This was a lie, but the judge believed them or pretended to believe them." Marcus felt sick hearing the story. "How long ago did this happen?" he asked. 3 years ago, Thex replied. "I have been seeking justice ever since, but every path I try leads to a wall. The coalition tells me to accept the verdict and move on. They say pursuing it further would damage relations between Krillia and Earth, but how can there be real relations when humans can murder Krillians without consequences?" The commander's anger was controlled, but Marcus could sense the rage burning underneath. Thex continued speaking. "I am not the only one. I have spoken with others who lost family members to human violence. We have begun to suspect that someone powerful is protecting these criminals, but we have no proof. If what you are saying is true, if there is a conspiracy, then perhaps we finally have a chance to expose it." Marcus explained their plan to gather evidence and build a case against Judge Holloway and whoever else was involved in the conspiracy. Thex nodded slowly. "I will help you," he said. "I will use my military connections to investigate from that angle. I will also reach out to other Krillians who have suffered injustice. Together we may be strong enough to stand against this corruption." The 3 of them spent the next several hours discussing strategy and sharing information. Kira offered to use Xanthian analytical technology to search for patterns in financial records and communications data. Thex promised to investigate Judge Holloway's connections to human military and political figures. Marcus would continue working through legal channels while Claire gathered documentary evidence and Amy fed them information from inside the security force. They agreed to meet regularly at secure locations and to use encrypted communications for all sensitive discussions. They also agreed that secrecy was essential. If Terra first learned about their investigation too early, they would almost certainly try to stop it through intimidation, violence, or worse. Marcus, Kira, and Thex were putting their lives at risk by pursuing this, but none of them were willing to back down. As the meeting ended, Thex placed one massive hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You are not like the other humans I have known," he said. "You seek justice even when it works against your own species. This is rare and worthy of respect. Do not make me regret trusting you." Marcus met the commander's 4-eyed gaze and promised he would see this through no matter what it cost. Part 4. Claire made the breakthrough 2 weeks into the investigation. She had been working through financial records using search algorithms designed to detect unusual patterns in large datasets. Most of the work was boring. Hours of staring at numbers and transaction codes that meant nothing. But Claire was patient and thorough. When she found the first anomaly, she almost missed it because it seemed so small. Judge Holloway had received a payment of 50,000 credits from a company called Terran Solutions 3 days after acquitting the 2 human miners who killed the Krillian worker. The payment was listed as consulting fees for legal expertise. On the surface, it looked legitimate. Judges were allowed to do consulting work during their off hours as long as it didn't create conflicts of interest. But something about the timing bothered Claire, so she dug deeper into Terran Solutions. The company was registered on Earth with a business address in New Seattle, the same city where Seek had been killed. Terran Solutions claimed to provide security consulting services to corporations operating in contested territories. Claire searched for more information about the company's leadership and found only vague references to a board of directors with no names listed. The company had no website, no public communications, and no obvious business activity beyond occasional consulting payments to various individuals. Claire showed her findings to Marcus, who immediately recognized the significance. This could be a shell company used to funnel money to Judge Holloway without leaving obvious trails. Marcus asked Claire to search for other payments from Terran Solutions or related companies. Claire spent the next 3 days expanding her search, and what she found was stunning. Judge Holloway had received over 50 million credits in payments from various companies over the past 3 years. All of the companies shared similar characteristics like vague business descriptions, minimal public presence, and registration addresses that led to empty offices or mail forwarding services. The payments were always labeled as consulting fees, speaking honorariums, or expert witness compensation. Individually, they looked innocent, but together they painted a picture of systematic bribery. Marcus brought this information to Kira and Commander Thex during their next secure meeting. Kira used Xanthian analytical software to map out the network of shell companies and their connections. What emerged was a web of financial entities all linked back to a central organization. The software identified communication patterns, shared bank accounts, and overlapping board members hidden behind layers of corporate privacy laws. At the center of the web was a foundation called the Advancement of Terran Interests. The foundation claimed to promote human culture and achievement throughout the galaxy. It funded scholarships, sponsored cultural events, and supported research into human history. On paper, it looked like a harmless cultural organization, but the financial analysis showed that the foundation was also funding the shell companies that paid Judge Holloway and potentially dozens of other officials. Commander Thex used his military contacts to investigate the Foundation's leadership. What he found was deeply troubling. The Foundation's board included retired military officers, wealthy corporate executives, and several high-ranking government officials. Many of these individuals had publicly expressed views that humanity should take a more dominant role in the Galactic Coalition. Some had even suggested that humans were naturally superior to other species and deserved preferential treatment. The investigation was revealing the existence of exactly what they had feared. Terra First was real, and it wasn't just a fringe movement. It was an organized conspiracy with significant financial resources and connections throughout human society. The conspiracy's goal appeared to be ensuring that humans could act without accountability for crimes against aliens. Judge Holloway was just one piece of a much larger operation designed to establish human supremacy within the coalition. Marcus knew they needed to find direct evidence, connecting Terra First to the judge's corrupt verdicts. Financial records proved bribery, but they needed to show that the bribes were specifically intended to buy favorable outcomes in criminal cases. They needed communications, meeting records, or testimony from someone inside the conspiracy. That kind of evidence would be extremely dangerous to pursue because it meant getting close to the people they were investigating. Amy Harper provided the next crucial lead. She had been quietly investigating Judge Holloway's personal connections and discovered that the judge regularly met with a man named Gordon Price. Amy recognized the name because Gordon was the father of Danny Price, one of the officers who killed Seek. Gordon was also listed as a senior advisor to the Advancement of Terran Interests. The connection was too obvious to be coincidence. Marcus asked Amy to surveil Gordon Price and document his movements. Amy was hesitant because this went far beyond her official duties and could cost her career if discovered. But she agreed because she believed it was the right thing to do. For the next week, Amy followed Gordon Price during her off hours. She documented his meetings, photographed the people he spoke with, and recorded his travel patterns. Gordon Price met with Judge Holloway 4 times during that week, always at private locations like expensive restaurants or exclusive clubs. Amy couldn't hear their conversations, but she photographed them together. The images showed the 2 men in deep discussion, sometimes looking at documents or tablets. On the final night of surveillance, Amy saw Gordon hand the judge a small package. The exchange was quick but deliberate. Amy reported this to Marcus, who realized they might have visual evidence of bribery in progress. But they needed to know what was in the package, and they needed to prove it was related to upcoming cases. Marcus made a difficult decision. He asked Kira if Xanthian technology could intercept the judge's communications. Kira said it was possible but highly illegal, and would require breaking coalition privacy laws. The team debated the ethics of illegal surveillance for hours. Marcus argued that sometimes you had to break small laws to stop people from getting away with murder. Claire worried that using illegal evidence would invalidate their entire case. Commander Thex had no patience for legal technicalities, and said they should use whatever methods were necessary. Kira pointed out that if they got caught, they would all be arrested and the conspiracy would continue unchecked. Finally, Marcus made the call. They would intercept Judge Holloway's communications, but they would keep that evidence separate. If they found proof of the conspiracy through the intercepts, they would look for legal ways to obtain the same information. The illegal evidence would guide their investigation, but wouldn't be used directly in any prosecution. It was a compromise that still made Marcus uncomfortable, but he saw no other way forward. Kira set up the surveillance equipment in her laboratory. The technology could monitor electronic communications within a certain radius and decrypt most standard encryption protocols. For 3 days they listened to Judge Holloway's calls, read his messages, and watched his data transfers. Most of it was boring, routine judicial business. But on the 4th day they hit the jackpot. Judge Holloway received a video call from a woman named Patricia Stone, who identified herself as the Director of Operations for Terra First. The name was said openly, confirming that the organization existed and that Holloway was directly connected to it. Patricia discussed an upcoming case involving human soldiers accused of attacking an alien refugee camp. She told Holloway that the soldiers were Terra First operatives and that their acquittal was essential to the movement's goals. The conversation included specific instructions on how Holloway should handle the case. Patricia told him which evidence to exclude, which witnesses to discredit, and what legal theories to use in his verdict. She promised additional payments once the soldiers were freed. Holloway agreed to everything without hesitation. The entire conversation was captured in perfect clarity by Kira's surveillance equipment. Marcus listened to the recording 3 times to make sure he understood every word. This was the proof they needed, but it was also the most dangerous information they had collected. If Terra First discovered that their communications had been intercepted, they would know someone was investigating them. The team would become targets. Marcus looked around at his unlikely allies. Claire with her youth and idealism, Amy with her cop's instincts, Kira with her grief and determination, and Commander Thex with his warrior's honor. They had all risked everything to get this far. Now they had to decide what to do with the evidence they had gathered. They couldn't go to the normal authorities because those authorities might be compromised. They couldn't go public immediately because Terra First would destroy the evidence and eliminate witnesses. They needed a plan that would expose the conspiracy completely while protecting themselves from retaliation. Marcus spent that night working through scenarios and outcomes, trying to find a path that led to justice without getting everyone killed. By morning, he had the outline of a strategy. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it might work. He called the team together and presented his plan. They would continue gathering evidence for 2 more weeks. Then they would approach Chief Justice Elena Martinez, who was Judge Holloway's direct superior. Part 5. Marcus requested a private meeting with Chief Justice Elena Martinez, exactly 2 weeks later. He sent the request through official channels claiming he had information about judicial misconduct that required her immediate attention. Elena's office responded within hours and scheduled the meeting for the following afternoon. Marcus spent that night preparing his presentation and making backup copies of all evidence. Claire would hold one complete set of files with instructions to release everything if Marcus didn't check in after the meeting. The morning of the meeting, Marcus reviewed his strategy one final time with the team. He would present the evidence systematically, starting with the pattern of suspicious verdicts and building toward the financial records and intercepted communications. He wouldn't mention the illegal surveillance initially. Instead, he would focus on the legitimate evidence they had gathered through public records and witness statements. The goal was to convince Elena to launch an official investigation that would uncover the same information through legal means. Claire hugged him before he left for the meeting. "Be careful," she said. "If this goes wrong, promise me you'll get out of there." Marcus promised, though he wasn't sure he could keep that promise if things went badly. Amy had positioned herself near Elena's office building, ready to intervene if Marcus sent a distress signal. Kira and Thex were monitoring communications from Kira's lab, ready to release the evidence publicly if necessary. Marcus arrived at the Coalition Supreme Court building 30 minutes early. The structure was enormous, built from materials that seemed to shift colors in the light. Security was tight, with armed guards from multiple species checking credentials at every entrance. Marcus passed through 3 checkpoints before reaching the executive level where Elena's chambers were located. Her assistant, an efficient-looking human woman named Julie, showed him into a waiting area decorated with artwork from across the galaxy. Elena Martinez kept him waiting for exactly 15 minutes. When Julie finally escorted him into the Chief Justice's private chambers, Marcus found himself in a room that spoke of power and authority. The walls were lined with legal texts from hundreds of worlds. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, carved from a single piece of dark wood that must have come from Earth. Elena sat behind the desk wearing her judicial robes, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Marcus introduced himself, though they had met briefly at official functions. Elena gestured for him to sit and asked what information he had about judicial misconduct. Marcus opened his tablet and began his presentation. He showed her the list of cases where Judge Holloway had presided over trials involving human defendants and alien victims. He walked through each case, explaining how the evidence should have led to convictions, but Holloway found ways to acquit or give minimal sentences. Elena listened without interrupting, her face showing no emotion. Marcus continued with the financial evidence showing the payments from shell companies to Judge Holloway. He explained how the companies were connected to the advancement of Terran interests, and how that organization appeared to be funding a conspiracy to protect human criminals. Elena asked a few clarifying questions about the financial analysis, but still gave no indication of her thoughts. Marcus was approaching the most dangerous part of his presentation when he noticed something that made his instincts scream a warning. Elena's reactions seemed rehearsed, like she was playing a role rather than genuinely engaging with shocking information. Her questions were too precise, as if she already knew what he was going to say. Marcus's years of courtroom experience had taught him to read people, and what he was reading from Elena Martinez was very wrong. He made a quick decision to hold back the most damaging evidence. Instead of revealing the intercepted communications, Marcus concluded his presentation with the financial records and witness statements. He told Elena that he believed Judge Holloway was corrupt and requested that she launch an official investigation. Elena sat back in her chair and studied Marcus for a long moment. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Elena spoke, and her words confirmed Marcus's worst fears. She said that the evidence he presented was interesting, but largely circumstantial. She questioned whether the pattern of verdicts really proved corruption, or just reflected Judge Holloway's judicial philosophy. She suggested that the financial payments might have legitimate explanations that Marcus hadn't considered. Her tone was reasonable, but Marcus heard the message underneath. Elena wasn't going to act on this information. Marcus pushed back, arguing that the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence, and that the financial connections deserved investigation regardless of other factors. Elena continued to deflect, saying she would review the materials but cautioning Marcus about making serious accusations without ironclad proof. She reminded him that judges had broad discretion in how they interpreted law and evidence. She warned that pursuing this matter recklessly could damage his reputation and career. The conversation was going exactly as Marcus had feared it might. Elena was either part of the conspiracy or too afraid of it to act. Marcus was about to excuse himself and activate the backup plan when the door to Elena's chambers opened. Judge Vincent Holloway walked in, followed by 4 armed security officers. Marcus's heart sank as he realized he had walked into a trap. Elena's voice lost its reasonable tone and became cold. "Marcus Williams, you're under arrest for espionage, theft of classified information, and conspiracy against the Galactic Coalition. Your illegal investigation ends now." The security officers moved toward Marcus, who remained seated. His mind raced through options, but none of them looked good. He was unarmed and outnumbered in the heart of the Supreme Court building, with no easy escape route. Judge Holloway looked pleased with himself as he came around the desk to stand next to Elena. The two of them together left no doubt that they were working together. Holloway spoke directly to Marcus. You should have accepted the verdict and moved on. No one appointed you to be the conscience of humanity. We are trying to ensure that humans are treated fairly in a galaxy that often discriminates against us. Your investigation threatens everything we have built. Marcus found his voice and challenged them. Treating humans fairly doesn't mean letting them commit murder without consequences. You're not fighting discrimination. You're enabling criminals and destroying the Coalition's justice system. Elena laughed without humor. The Coalition's justice system was designed by aliens to control human expansion. We are simply correcting the imbalance. Humanity deserves to be the dominant species in this galaxy, and people like you who work against human interests are traitors. The conversation revealed just how deep the corruption went. Elena Martinez, the Chief Justice of the Coalition Supreme Court, was an active member of Terra First. She wasn't just covering for Judge Holloway, she was part of the conspiracy's leadership. Marcus wondered how many other officials at the highest levels were involved. How far did this conspiracy reach into human government and the Coalition administration? But Marcus still had one advantage they didn't know about. Before the meeting, he had activated a hidden recording device that Claire had designed. The device was broadcasting everything to Claire's tablet in real time. Every word Elena and Holloway said was being recorded and transmitted. Claire would have heard Elena order his arrest and would be executing the backup plan right now. Marcus decided to buy time for Claire to work. He engaged Elena and Holloway in conversation, asking them to explain their philosophy and goals. They were arrogant enough to talk, believing they had won and that Marcus posed no further threat. Elena explained that Terra First had been operating for almost a decade, slowly placing members in key positions throughout human government and the Coalition bureaucracy. Their goal was to ensure humanity would eventually dominate the galaxy through legal and political means, rather than military conquest, Judge. Holloway added that the cases Marcus had identified were just a small part of their work. Terra First was also manipulating trade agreements, influencing diplomatic relations and controlling the flow of technology between species. They were building a system where humans would be first among equals in name, but actually superior in practice. Every human who was protected from prosecution, every favorable trade deal, every diplomatic advantage added up to systematic human supremacy. Marcus listened with growing horror and anger. These weren't patriots trying to protect humanity. They were supremacists trying to establish an empire. They were willing to sacrifice justice, truth, and the principles that supposedly made humanity worthy of joining the Coalition. They claimed to be acting in humanity's interests, but they were actually betraying everything humanity stood for. The security officers grew impatient with the talking and moved to restrain Marcus. He didn't resist as they pulled his hands behind his back and secured them with electronic cuffs. Elena told the officers to take Marcus to a holding cell while they decided what to do with him. She suggested that Marcus might have an unfortunate accident before he could tell anyone about their conversation. Holloway agreed that it would be simpler if Marcus just disappeared. Part 6, the 90-minute deadline, created chaos that spread beyond Elena's chambers. Elena tried to maintain control, but Marcus could see the panic in her eyes. She ordered the security officers to lock down the Supreme Court building and begin searching for Claire. She sent urgent messages to other Terra First members, warning them that their conspiracy might be exposed. Judge Holloway paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair and muttering about how this couldn't be happening. Marcus remained calm despite the electronic cuffs cutting into his wrists. He knew that Claire had gone to ground in the station's lower levels where surveillance was poor and Terra First's control was weakest. Finding her in 90 minutes would be nearly impossible, especially since she could move between different sections using service tunnels that most people didn't know existed. Amy, Kira, and Thex would also be taking protective measures now that the plan was in motion. Elena tried negotiating with Marcus. She offered to let him go free if he would call off the release and destroy all evidence. She promised that Judge Holloway would resign quietly and that Terra First would cease its operations. Marcus knew she was lying and didn't even bother responding. Elena grew more desperate as the timer counted down past 70 minutes. She threatened Marcus's family back on Earth and his friends on the station. Marcus called her bluff, pointing out that harming his family would only confirm everything in the evidence package and turn him into a martyr. Judge Holloway suggested they just kill Marcus immediately and use the time to prepare damage control. Elena considered this but realized it wouldn't help. Claire had set up the dead man's switch to require regular confirmations from Marcus. If he died, the evidence would be released automatically. They needed Marcus alive and cooperative, or they needed to find Claire and stop the transmission. With less than 60 minutes remaining, neither option looked achievable. While Elena and Holloway argued, Marcus heard distant sounds of conflict coming from somewhere in the building. Alarms began blaring, and security announcements warned of an unauthorized breach in the court's detention wing. Elena's tablet lit up with urgent messages reporting that armed Krillian soldiers had entered the building and were fighting their way toward her chambers. Commander Thex had decided not to wait for the timer to run out. Elena screamed at her security officers to defend her chambers while she contacted Coalition Military Command for backup. But the officers looked uncertain. They had been hired to provide courthouse security, not to fight Krillian warriors. Krillians had a reputation as some of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy, trained from childhood in combat and virtually fearless. 4 human security officers with light weapons wouldn't last long against determined Krillian soldiers. The sounds of fighting grew closer. Marcus heard energy weapons firing and the heavy thud of bodies hitting walls. Elena and Holloway began backing toward a private exit at the rear of the chambers. Elena ordered the security officers to stay and delay the Krillians while she and Holloway escaped. The officers looked at each other and then at Marcus. One of them, a young woman named Kate, stepped forward and removed Marcus's cuffs. Kate told Elena that she didn't sign up to be part of a conspiracy and wasn't going to die protecting corrupt judges. The other 3 officers agreed and moved away from the door. Elena's face twisted with rage as she realized her own security force was abandoning her. She and Holloway fled through the private exit, leaving Marcus and the security officers to face whatever was coming through the main door. The door exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments. Commander Thex entered first, his massive form filling the doorway, followed by 6 Krillian soldiers in full combat armor. Thex's 4 eyes scanned the room and locked onto Marcus. The commander crossed the distance in 3 long strides and grabbed Marcus by the shoulders. "You are alive," Thex said with obvious relief. "Where are the corrupt ones?" Marcus pointed to the private exit and explained that Elena and Holloway had fled. Thex barked orders in the Krillian language and 4 of his soldiers took off in pursuit. He told the remaining soldiers to secure the chambers and protect Marcus. Then he contacted his command ship in orbit and reported that the primary target was alive and the mission was proceeding. Marcus realized that Thex had coordinated with his government to conduct this raid. The Krillian military was now directly involved in exposing Terra. First, Kate and the other security officers looked terrified, but Thex ignored them after determining they weren't a threat. Marcus asked Thex where Claire was and whether she was safe. Thex confirmed that Claire was in a secured location in the Xanthian quarter, protected by both Krillian and Xanthian forces. Dr. Kira was with her and Lieutenant Amy Harper was coordinating security. The entire team was safe, and the evidence was ready to be released on schedule unless Marcus called it off. Marcus checked his tablet and saw that 42 minutes remained on the countdown. He asked Thex what happened to the plan of waiting for the 90 minutes to expire. Thex's expression was fierce. "My soldiers intercepted communications showing that Terra First was sending assassins after all of you. I decided immediate action was necessary to protect the team and secure the evidence. Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense." The decision had been tactically sound, but it complicated the situation. Krillian soldiers had just attacked the Coalition Supreme Court building and were now holding the Chief Justice's chambers. This would be seen as an act of war by some human factions regardless of the justification. The political fallout would be enormous, but Marcus understood why Thex had acted. Protecting his allies was more important to the commander than diplomatic niceties. The 4 Krillian soldiers who had pursued Elena and Holloway returned empty-handed. They reported that the judges had escaped through service tunnels that led to the station's transport hub. By now they could be anywhere on the station or even fleeing on private ships. Thex growled in frustration but accepted the report. He told Marcus that catching the judges was secondary to releasing the evidence and protecting the team. Marcus made a decision. He contacted Claire and told her to release the evidence immediately, rather than waiting for the timer to expire. There was no point in delaying now that the situation had escalated to violence. Claire acknowledged, and within seconds, the evidence began flooding every news network, government database, and public forum in the galaxy. The complete record of Tara First's conspiracy, Judge Holloway's corruption, Elena Martinez's involvement, and the systematic protection of human criminals became available to billions of beings simultaneously. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News networks across hundreds of worlds began broadcasting special reports about the human supremacist conspiracy. Alien governments issued statements demanding explanations from Earth. Human media outlets were torn between shock, denial, and calls for accountability. Social networks exploded with reactions ranging from outrage to defensive justifications. Within 30 minutes of the release, the story had reached every corner of the Galactic Coalition. Marcus watched the reactions on his tablet, feeling exhausted and relieved. They had done it. The truth was out and no one could suppress it now. Tara First could try to spin the story or claim the evidence was fabricated, but the sheer volume and detail of the documentation made denial impossible. The recordings of Elena and Holloway discussing the conspiracy in their own voices were particularly damning. Their words would be played billions of times across the galaxy. But the victory came with immediate costs. Marcus received urgent messages that Amy Harper had been attacked by Tara First operatives during the chaos. She was badly wounded and fighting for her life in a medical facility. Kira's laboratory had been firebombed by retreating Tara First members, destroying years of research and nearly killing Kira herself. Only quick action by Xanthian security had saved her life. Commander Thex learned that his family on the Krillian homeworld had been targeted by assassins, though fortunately they survived with injuries. The personal price was high, but Marcus knew it would have been higher if they had stayed silent. Amy had chosen to fight corruption, knowing the risks. Kira had risked everything to seek justice for her murdered colleague. Thex had put his family in danger to protect Marcus and expose the truth. Claire had faced down powerful enemies with courage beyond her years. Every member of the team had sacrificed something important for the sake of justice. Marcus received a communication from the Coalition Security Council ordering him to report immediately for questioning. The council wanted to understand how a human lawyer had infiltrated the Supreme Court with alien military forces and exposed the Chief Justice as a conspirator. Marcus knew the next few days would be filled with interrogations, hearings, and political maneuvering. Tara First would try to paint him as a traitor, while their opponents would try to use him as a symbol. Both sides would twist the truth to serve their agendas. But Marcus also knew that the evidence spoke for itself. The financial records, the intercepted communications, the testimony from victims and witnesses, all of it painted a clear picture of systematic corruption. Judge Holloway and Chief Justice Elena Martinez were guilty beyond any doubt. Part 7. Amy Harper died 3 days after the evidence was released. She had been shot twice by Tara First assassins while coordinating security for the team. The wounds were too severe, and despite the best efforts of Coalition medical staff, she slipped away while unconscious. Marcus attended her memorial service along with Claire, Kira, and Commander Thex. Amy's family was there, her parents and her younger brother, all struggling to understand why she had been murdered for trying to do the right thing. The service was held at the Coalition Security Force headquarters with full honors. Amy's commander gave a speech about her dedication and courage. Marcus spoke briefly about how Amy had risked everything to expose corruption and protect innocent lives. He promised her family that her sacrifice would not be forgotten. As they lowered Amy's flag-draped casket, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Amy had died because he had asked her to help with the investigation. Her blood was on his hands even if Tara First had pulled the trigger. The galaxy was still reeling from the revelations about Tara First. The Coalition Security Council had launched formal investigations into over 200 officials suspected of being part of the conspiracy. Judge Holloway had been captured trying to flee to a human colony world that refused to extradite him. He was now in custody awaiting trial. Chief Justice Elena Martinez had managed to escape and was believed to be hiding somewhere in the outer territories. A galaxy-wide warrant had been issued for her arrest. The trials began within weeks. Judge Holloway was first, facing charges of corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Marcus testified at the trial, describing how he had uncovered the pattern of suspicious verdicts and traced the financial connections to Tara. First, the intercepted communications were played in the courtroom with Holloway's voice clearly heard discussing How to protect Terra First operatives. The evidence was so overwhelming that Holloway's defense attorney barely bothered to mount a case. The verdict came quickly. Holloway was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment on a maximum security prison world. The 3 officers who killed Seek were retried with a judge who wasn't corrupt. This time the evidence was allowed and the witnesses testified. Danny Price, Greg Morton, and Carl Hughes were all convicted of murder and received life sentences alongside Holloway. Marcus felt satisfaction watching them led away in chains, but it didn't erase the pain of Amy's death or undo the harm they had caused. More trials followed as other Terra First members were identified and prosecuted. Corporate executives who had funded the conspiracy, government officials who had provided cover, military officers who had supplied resources, all of them faced justice. Some were convicted and imprisoned. Others accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking conspirators. A few managed to flee beyond coalition jurisdiction and disappeared into the lawless zones where no government could reach them. But the hardest challenge wasn't prosecuting the conspirators. It was rebuilding trust between humans and other species. Many aliens questioned whether humans could be trusted at all after Terra First had operated so openly and enlisted so many officials. There were calls to expel humanity from the Galactic Coalition and restrict human travel throughout the galaxy. Some alien species broke off diplomatic relations with Earth entirely. Trade agreements were suspended and cultural exchange. Programs were canceled. Marcus was appointed to head a new Truth and Reconciliation Commission tasked with investigating the full extent of Terra First's operations and recommending reforms to prevent similar conspiracies. Claire joined him as deputy commissioner. The work was exhausting and often heartbreaking. They interviewed hundreds of victims who had suffered because of Terra First's protection of human criminals. They reviewed thousands of cases to determine which verdicts had been corrupted and which convictions were sound. The commission traveled to dozens of worlds meeting with alien governments and communities. Marcus spoke at forums and assemblies trying to explain that Terra First didn't represent all of humanity. He acknowledged the harm that had been done and promised that humanity would do better. Some audiences were receptive while others were hostile. On one Krillian colony, Marcus was pelted with rocks by protesters who blamed all humans for the death of Commander Thex's daughter. Security had to evacuate Marcus before the situation turned violent. Dr. Kira Vex became Marcus's closest ally in the reconciliation efforts. She had lost her research in the firebombing, but found new purpose in helping repair relations between species. Kira's presence at the commission hearings carried weight because she was an alien who had been directly harmed by Terra First, but chose to work with humans toward justice. Her testimony was powerful and often moved audiences to reconsider their views about humanity. Marcus and Kira spent long hours discussing how to rebuild trust. They developed proposals for mixed species tribunals to prevent any single species from dominating the justice system. They recommended rotating judgeship so that no judge could establish long-term corrupt relationships. They suggested independent oversight bodies with representatives from multiple species to review verdicts and investigate complaints. Many of these reforms were adopted by the coalition, despite resistance from some human officials who saw them as discriminatory. Claire focused on education reform. She argued that the root of Terra First's ideology was ignorance and fear of other species. She worked with alien educators to develop new curriculum for human schools that emphasized shared values across species and celebrated diversity rather than promoting human exceptionalism. The program met fierce resistance from human nationalists who claimed it was indoctrination. But younger humans generally embraced the changes, having grown up in a galaxy where cooperation was necessary for survival. Commander Thex never fully recovered from the assassination attempt on his family. His wife had been badly injured and required months of medical treatment. His youngest child had been traumatized by the attack and struggled with nightmares. Thex resigned from military service to focus on his family, but remained in contact with Marcus. The bond forged during their investigation had grown into genuine friendship, despite the differences between their species. Thex often said that Marcus had shown him that not all humans were supremacists or cowards. Some were capable of extraordinary courage and integrity. Years passed slowly. Gradually, painfully, humanity began to redeem itself in the eyes of the galaxy. The prosecutions of Terra First members demonstrated that humans were willing to hold their own accountable. The reforms to the justice system showed that humans could accept limitations on their power. The educational changes proved that human society was capable of evolving beyond destructive ideologies. It wasn't enough for everyone, and some alien species remained distrustful, but it was progress. Marcus established the Amy Harper Foundation in memory of his fallen colleague. The foundation provided support and protection for whistleblowers and investigators who fought against corruption, regardless of their species. It funded legal defense for those who faced retaliation for exposing wrongdoing. It offered security services for witnesses who testified against powerful criminals. The foundation quickly became an important institution in the coalition, helping dozens of brave individuals stand up against injustice. On the 10th anniversary of Seek's death, a memorial was unveiled on Arcturus Prime. The monument honored all the victims of Terra First's conspiracy and celebrated the investigators who had exposed it. Marcus attended the ceremony along with Seek's family, Amy's family, and representatives from dozens of species. Kira gave a speech about how loss could be transformed into purpose and grief could fuel the fight for justice. Claire spoke about the next generation's responsibility to maintain the reforms that had been won through such sacrifice. Marcus was asked to speak last. He stood before the crowd of thousands representing hundreds of worlds and struggled to find words adequate to the moment. Finally, he spoke simply and honestly. "Justice isn't about protecting your own kind," he said. "It's about protecting what's right even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything." That's what Amy Harper understood. That's what all the victims of Terra First deserved. That's what we owe to each other regardless of which world we come from or what species we belong to. He continued. Terra First believed that humans were naturally superior and deserved to dominate the galaxy. They were wrong. What makes any species worthy of respect isn't superiority, but the willingness to grow, to admit mistakes, to hold themselves accountable. Humanity stumbled badly. We gave in to our worst impulses and betrayed the principles we claimed to value. But we also produced people like Amy who fought corruption, even knowing it might cost her life. We produced young people like Claire who believe in a better future. We produced the reforms and institutions that will make it harder for another Terra First to emerge. Marcus concluded with a message to the younger generation in the audience. The work of building a just galaxy is never finished. Every generation has to choose whether to uphold those principles or surrender to fear and hatred. Terra First thought humanity should dominate through power and deception. Part 8. Marcus Williams retired from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the age of 83. He had served for 41 years working to repair the damage Terra First had inflicted on humanity's reputation and the Coalition's justice system. His hair had turned completely white, and his body moved with the careful slowness of advanced age despite access to medical treatments that extended human lifespan. He was tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion, tired from decades of fighting battles that never quite ended. Claire Bennett took over as head of the commission when Marcus stepped down. She was 67 now, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that came from decades of difficult work. Claire had proven herself to be even more dedicated than Marcus, spending her entire adult life in service to justice and reconciliation. She had never married and had no children, having devoted herself completely to the mission that began when she was a young lawyer helping Marcus investigate a corrupt verdict. The galaxy had changed dramatically. In the 4 decades since Terra First was exposed, the reforms that Marcus and his team fought for had been implemented and refined. Mixed species tribunals were now standard throughout the coalition. Judges served limited terms with mandatory rotation to prevent corruption from taking root. Independent oversight bodies reviewed controversial verdicts and investigated complaints about judicial misconduct. The changes weren't perfect, but they made systematic corruption like Terra First's conspiracy much harder to execute. Human society had evolved as well, though not without pain and resistance. The educational reforms that Claire championed had produced a generation of humans who grew up learning about other species as equals rather than inferiors. Cultural exchange programs brought young humans to alien worlds and young aliens to Earth, creating personal connections that transcended species boundaries. Interspecies marriages and partnerships became common, producing a new generation of children who embodied the coalition's ideals of unity through diversity. But Terra First hadn't been completely destroyed. Elena Martinez had died 15 years ago on a remote outpost where she had been hiding, killed by bounty hunters who collected the reward offered by the coalition. However, her ideology survived in scattered groups that operated in the shadows. These Neo-Terra First cells were smaller and less organized than the original conspiracy, but they still committed crimes against aliens and promoted human supremacism. Fighting them had become a permanent task for coalition security forces. Marcus returned to Earth for his retirement, settling in a small house in Atlanta near where he had grown up. The city looked very different from the one he remembered from his youth. Alien residents were common now, living and working alongside humans. Signs were written in multiple languages and restaurants served food from dozens of worlds. The integration wasn't always smooth, and there were still neighborhoods where aliens weren't welcome, but overall, Earth had become a truly multi-species world. Kira Vex visited Marcus regularly despite her own advancing age. The Xanthian scientist was over 100 years old now and moved slowly, her scales having lost some of their vibrant color. She and Marcus had developed a deep friendship over the decades, bound together by their shared experience of fighting Terra First and their continued commitment to justice. They often sat in Marcus's garden discussing philosophy, politics, and the state of the galaxy while drinking tea that Kira brought from the Xanthian homeworld. During one of these visits, Kira told Marcus about a new project she was working on. She had been compiling oral histories from victims of Terra First and from the investigators who exposed the conspiracy. The project aimed to preserve the memory of what happened so that future generations would understand the danger of supremacist ideologies. Kira wanted Marcus to contribute his story, but he had been reluctant. Marcus didn't enjoy talking about those years, the fear and danger and loss, but Kira persisted with gentle patience. "Your story matters," she told him. "Not just the facts of what you discovered, but why you chose to fight, when it would have been easier and safer to stay silent. Young people need to understand that justice requires courage and that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite fear. You were afraid during the investigation, I saw it. Yet you continued anyway because you believed it was right. That is the lesson they need to learn." Marcus finally agreed to do the interviews. Over several weeks, he sat with Kira's research assistant and recounted everything from the moment he watched Judge Holloway deliver the corrupt verdict to the decades of work that followed. He talked about Amy Harper's sacrifice and how her death still haunted him. He described Claire's growth from an idealistic young lawyer into a formidable advocate for justice. He spoke about Commander Thex and the unlikely alliance between human and alien investigators. He explained the fear he felt walking into Elena Martinez's chambers knowing it might be a trap. The interviews were exhausting but also cathartic. Marcus had carried these memories alone for so long, and speaking them aloud felt like setting down a heavy burden. When the interviews were published as part of Kira's collection, they reached millions of readers across the galaxy. Many young people wrote to Marcus expressing how his story had inspired them to pursue careers in law, investigation, or public service. Some admitted they had been taught Terra First ideology by their parents and that Marcus's story helped them question those beliefs. Marcus received another unexpected honor when the coalition announced they were establishing the Marcus Williams Award for Courage and Justice. The award would be given annually to individuals who exposed corruption or fought against injustice at great personal risk. Amy Harper was named as the first posthumous recipient. The ceremony was held on Arcturus Prime with representatives from every member species in attendance. Marcus sat in the audience, feeling overwhelmed by emotion as they showed Hollows of Amy and recounted her role in exposing Terra First. Claire surprised Marcus by revealing that she had nominated him for the award as well. She gave a speech describing how Marcus had risked his career and life to investigate Judge Holloway, despite having every incentive to look the other way. She told the audience about his integrity and determination, about how he never wavered even when faced with powerful enemies. The coalition presented Marcus with the award bearing his own name, which seemed ironic but deeply moving. He accepted it in Amy's honor, saying that she deserved to have her name remembered alongside his. Commander Thex attended the ceremony looking old and weathered, but still imposing. He embraced Marcus afterward and told him in his rumbling voice that humanity had been fortunate to produce someone like him. Thex's family had recovered from the assassination attempt, but the scars remained both physical and emotional. His wife walked with a limp and his youngest child still struggled with anxiety. But they were alive, and that was what mattered. Thex told Marcus that his family's survival was partly due to Marcus's courage in exposing Terra first before the conspiracy could do even more damage. The years continued, passing, and Marcus's health began declining, despite medical interventions. He developed heart problems that required regular treatment, and his memory started showing gaps. Claire visited him weekly, bringing news about the commission's work and updates on cases they were investigating. She told him about a new generation of lawyers and investigators who had been inspired by his example. Many of them were aliens who had overcome their distrust of humans because of what Marcus represented. One evening, Kira arrived at Marcus's house looking troubled. She had received intelligence that a large cache of Terra First documents had been discovered on the abandoned station in the Outer Territories. The documents reportedly contained names of conspirators who had never been identified and details of operations that had remained hidden for decades. Coalition authorities were organizing an expedition to recover the documents, but they faced resistance from human nationalist groups who wanted the past left buried. Marcus listened to Kira's report, feeling a familiar anger stirring despite his exhaustion. Even after all these years, Terra First's poison continued spreading. Even after hundreds of prosecutions and reforms, there were still people who believed humanity should dominate rather than cooperate. He asked Kira what she needed from him. She said the expedition needed public support from respected figures to counter the nationalist opposition. Would Marcus be willing to make a statement endorsing the recovery operation? Marcus agreed immediately. That night he recorded a message that was broadcast across human networks. He spoke directly to his fellow humans, explaining why the documents needed to be recovered and the conspirators identified. He said that justice delayed was justice denied, and that victims deserved to know the full truth about who had harmed them. He challenged humans who opposed the recovery to examine their motives and ask themselves whether they were protecting justice or protecting criminals. The message generated fierce debate. Nationalist groups accused Marcus of being a traitor who had spent his life attacking humanity. They claimed he was senile and being manipulated by aliens who wanted to continue punishing humans for Terra First's crimes.